The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence born out of order, but the kind that made your throat dry, tense, suspended, unnatural. Every eye was locked on the tall, heavily restrained figure in the defendant's chair. Steel chains clinked around his wrists and ankles. His jaw twitched. His stare was empty. Not cold, worse than that. Hollow, then came the sound. Pause. Heavy pause, tapping on the marble floor. Slow, deliberate. Every step echoed louder than the last. A German shepherd emerged from the back of the courtroom, muscular, trained, alert, but something about its movement wasn't mechanical, like a service dog on duty. It was something else, something deeper. The dog wasn't just walking, he was searching. People began to shift in their seats. The judge's gavel tapped once, then stopped, and then it happened. The canine froze mid-step, head cocked, ears stiff. The dog's eyes locked on the inmate, and for a second, just one, the man's lips trembled. That's when the gasps began. The canine let out a low whine. Not aggressive, not threatening, but aching, recognizing, mourning. The prisoner looked away. Too late. The courtroom had seen it. The hardest man on trial, the one accused of the unforgivable, had just been recognized by a police dog, and worse, he knew the dog's name. Axel. The man muttered under his breath, barely audible. But the dog heard. Axel's body jolted forward, pulling the leash from the handler's grip. The officer tried to stop him, but the shepherd was too fast, too certain. Axel sprinted toward the prisoner, ignoring the shouted orders behind him. He didn't leap, he didn't attack. He simply reached the man, pressed his head against the inmate's leg, and whimpered. The silence shattered. Audible confusion rippled across the room. Whispers flared. Phones came out. The judge's gavel slammed, but even that couldn't restore order. Because what they were witnessing didn't make sense. A loyal canine unit, a decorated police dog, had just shown affection to a man accused of attempted murder, of a fellow. Carpenter, the handler finally caught up, pulling Axel back with a rough tug. But Axel resisted, eyes still glued to the prisoner like a soldier refusing to abandon his post. The man's eyes burned now, not from anger, from memory and from something he hadn't felt in a long time, shame. The judge called a recess. People stood, murmuring and buzzing with questions. The inmate sat frozen, jaw clenched. Axel was still staring at him, and he was staring back. Two souls once bound by duty, now separated by bars, and something far darker. But deep inside those silent seconds, a question was already forming in everyone's mind. Why did the dog remember him? And why did the prisoner look like he wished he hadn't? It started 2 years, ergo before the trial, before the betrayal, before the blood. Back when the man wasn't known as Inmate 04527. Back when his name still meant something. Back when Officer Ray Donnell had a badge, and a partner with 4 legs and a fearless heart. Back when he was still human. But now? Now he was something else. Something even Axel seemed to be trying to understand. And in that courtroom, in that moment, that stare between them, wasn't just reunion, it was revelation. Something had gone terribly wrong, and no one, not even the dog, knew the whole truth yet. But Ray, he remembered every second of it, every frame of the memory he wished he could erase, and the moment Axel touched him, that single moment, it all came rushing back. The rain, the scream, the gun, the silence after the shot, and then the betrayal. Not his, someone else's. But Ray took the fall, and now the only one who could prove it had just walked into that courtroom on 4 legs. Ray looked down at Axel again. The dog had stopped struggling. He was quiet now, still. But his eyes never wavered. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection deeper than chains, a history deeper than the court could see. Ray blinked once, and for the first time in 2 years, a single tear slid down his cheek. The chains rattled. The guards didn't know why, but Axel did, and Ray just whispered one word under his breath, "Why'd you come back?" Axel didn't answer, but his eyes did, and Ray knew, because the truth doesn't stay buried forever, especially when it walks on 4 legs. and remembers everything. 2 years earlier, Officer Ray Donald didn't say much. He didn't have to. Everyone at the precinct knew him as the quiet one, all instinct, no showboating. But when it came to tracking suspects, nobody moved like Ray and Axel. The bond between them wasn't just professional. It was built in fire, carved from near-death chases, gunfire exchanges, and the countless nights where silence was their only shelter. Axel wasn't just a dog. He was the only partner Ray had ever trusted with his life, and he'd earned that. Trust. It started on a case that nearly ended Ray's career before it ever took off. A warehouse raid. Gun traffickers. Rookie mistake on someone's part got the timing wrong. They went in early. Ray took point. 2 minutes in, the lights cut, and bullets tore through the steel siding. Chaos he was hit. Left shoulder, deep. Blood blurred his vision. He fell back, trying to crawl for cover. He didn't think he'd make it out. Then Axel, not even fully trained at the time, slipped his leash, charged into the gunfire, and dragged Ray by the vest through broken glass and mud to the extraction. Point? No one ordered him to. He just knew. Ray never forgot that moment. From then on, Axel wasn't a department asset. He was family. They trained together every morning. Rain, shine, pain, didn't matter. Axel learned to read Ray's heartbeat. Ray learned to listen to Axel's ears. They weren't flashy like some of the other K9 units. They didn't do tricks for the mayor, didn't show up on TV when medals were handed out. But when something went wrong in the city, a missing kid, a hostage in a basement, a suspect on the run, the sergeant always said the same thing. Call. Ray and Axel. They didn't always talk, but there was a language between them. A glance, a nod, a shared silence. Ray once sat on a park bench after a rough call, a child they couldn't save. He didn't cry, didn't shout. Just sat there, elbows on knees. Axel sat next to him. Didn't bark, didn't whine, just leaned against his side. Ray didn't move, but his hand slid down and found Axel's fur, and for 1 long hour neither of them moved. That was their bond, unspoken, unshakable. Back in the courtroom present day, Axel was calmer now, leashed again. But his eyes were still locked on Ray like a compass, refusing to point anywhere else. The handler, Officer Singh, tried to distract him with a command. "Leave it, Axel, leave it." Axel didn't budge. Ray sat in his seat, motionless, but his mind was moving fast. He hadn't seen Axel since that night, since the ambush, since the one thing that shattered everything. The trial wasn't just about a shooting, it was about betrayal. A brother in blue, left bleeding behind a drug house, with Ray's prints on the weapon. The city turned overnight. So did the force. But Axel was there. He saw it. He was in that alley. He chased the shooter through the broken fence into the dark. But something happened that night. Something Ray never got to say out loud. Because by the time backup arrived, Ray was on the ground, dazed, gun nearby, shirt soaked in blood. And Axel. He was gone. Disappeared into the maze of streets. Missing. For 2 whole days. When they found him, he was injured, limping, bite marks on his leg, but alive. And from that day on, they never let Axel near Ray again. They said it was for the dog's safety. But Ray knew better. They didn't want a loyal witness. They wanted a clean conviction, and Axel, he remembered more than anyone. Back in the judge's chambers, there was chaos. The defense attorney was rattled. The prosecutor wanted the footage, suppressed. The judge was flipping through motions, but in the holding cell below, Ray wasn't thinking about the case. He was thinking about the way Axel looked at him, not confused, not afraid, but hurt. Like the betrayal went both ways. Because Ray had once whispered a promise to him, "No matter what happens, we stay together, you and me." And he broke it, not by choice, but in the worst way possible, by vanishing without goodbye. Later that day, Axel was walked past the holding cells again on his way out. He stiffened as they passed cell B4. Ray stood quietly behind the bars. Axel stopped, his body tensed. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. Singh didn't notice. The dog edged just close enough to the bars. Ray lowered himself to eye level. There were no words, only silence. Then Axel made a sound Ray hadn't heard in years, a soft, low whimper, like grief that finally Found its voice. Ray closed his eyes and whispered so quietly even the walls barely caught it. "They took everything, pal. Even you." Axel whined again, paw pressed gently against the cold concrete, and that was all Ray needed to feel the weight of every broken second since that night. He reached through the bars and brushed his fingers against the shepherd's fur. For 1 second, he was whole again, but only for one, because tomorrow the trial would resume, and Ray knew something they didn't. He hadn't pulled that trigger, but someone had, and the only one who could prove it. Had 4 legs, sharp instincts, and a heart that remembered everything. The next morning, the courtroom doors opened to a storm of camera flashes and tension so thick even the guards walked tighter than usual. Ray was escorted in with chains around his wrists. The orange jumpsuit seemed to burn against his skin, but it wasn't the uniform that made him sweat. It was the way Axel hadn't barked, hadn't wagged his tail, hadn't flinched, only stared. Still, silent, suspicious, like something didn't add up, even for him. The prosecutor stepped forward confidently. Her name was Trina Cole, sharp voice, tighter suit. She had conviction in her eyes, but it wasn't just about justice. It was about winning. She clicked her pen. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to introduce a key piece of evidence. K9 Unit Axel, trained, certified, and present during the incident in question." Murmurs flew like sparks. "A dog as a witness?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "You want the jury to consider the actions of a dog as admissible testimony?" Trina smiled faintly. "Not testimony, behavior." She turned. A handler brought Axel forward. The German shepherd walked with precision but not enthusiasm. His eyes scanned the room like a war veteran walking back into the battlefield. Controlled, haunted. Trina gestured toward Ray. "Let the court observe the animal's reaction." Gasps echoed. Ray stayed seated, expression unreadable. Axel's paws tapped slowly along the floor, leash held tight by Singh. He got closer to the defense table, then closer. Then he stopped, right in front of Ray. No growl, no tail wag, just one long, unwavering stare. Then Axel sat directly in front of him. Trina smirked. "So you see, Your Honor, the dog displays no affection toward the accused. No positive recognition, no alert. That's not loyalty. That's disassociation. This was not a bond. This was an illusion." Whispers flared in the gallery. But Ray didn't react. He just stared at Axel. And that's when it happened. A blink, a twitch in the dog's ears. Axel's head turned, not to the left, not to the right, but toward the gallery. A very specific section of it. Row 3, seat 4. A man, dark suit. Watching. The man met Axel's eyes and immediately looked away, just for a second. But Ray caught it. He leaned slightly toward his defense lawyer and whispered, "That man. Find out who he is. Now." The courtroom broke for lunch. Trina strode out confidently, heels clacking. Axel was led away with Singh back toward the evidence unit. Down in the holding cell, Ray sat quietly, thinking about that man. He'd seen him once before, not in court, but on the night of the raid he was there. Not part of the department, not part of the crew, but nearby, watching, and Axel had seen him too. Upstairs, the judge reviewed confidential footage submitted by Trina. A street cam, grainy, low res. It showed a figure, Ray allegedly, emerging from the alley with a firearm, but it cut out before anything important. Still, it was enough to cause a stir, enough to seed doubt. Back in the hallway, Axel refused. "To eat," Singh noticed. "You okay, boy?" Axel simply lay down, head on paws, but his eyes kept shifting. Back to the courtroom door, back to Ray. The betrayal came during the afternoon session. The defense stood, ready to introduce their surprise witness, a street vendor who claimed to have seen the shooter flee and toss something into a trash bin. But before they could proceed, Trina raised her hand. "Objection, Your Honor. We have a newly surfaced piece of evidence that invalidates the defense timeline." The judge nodded. "Proceed." A projector lit up another video, this one from a nearby gas station. Clean footage, high-res time-stamped. It showed Ray arguing with someone near a car just minutes before the shooting. "Recognize that man with him?" Trina asked the jury. "That's Detective Briggs, now deceased." Another gasp. You see, Officer Donnell was not ambushed. He met with the victim, they argued, and minutes later shots rang out. The room tilted. Even Ray's lawyer froze, because the timestamp, though only 5 minutes off, conflicted with Ray's entire defense. And Ray knew that footage. It had been doctored. The gas station's angle didn't even cover that block. He'd been framed. But how, why? He turned toward the gallery again. The man from earlier, seat 4, was gone. Just vanished, like a shadow slipping out when the lights came on. And Axel. Axel was growling now, low, in his chest, at nothing visible. But it wasn't nothing, it was memory. It was scent. It was recognition. And Ray, chained to a lie he couldn't escape, knew something dark had crawled its way into this trial, something bigger than one botched raid. Because Axel didn't forget smells, didn't forget people, and he sure as hell didn't forget betrayal. That night, back at the K9 unit, Singh noticed Axel wouldn't go into his crate. He sat by the door, waiting, almost guarding it. Singh knelt down. "What is it, boy?" Axel didn't respond, just kept his ears pointed, toward the city, toward the prison, toward the truth waiting to be unleashed. The courthouse echoed with the usual late afternoon shuffle, heels tapping, documents shuffling, voices dropping. But inside the courtroom, silence was its own storm. Ray sat in his seat, wrists still cuffed. He didn't glance at the jury. He didn't flinch when the judge entered. He didn't blink when the prosecutor looked straight at him. His eyes were locked onto Axel, and Axel, for the first time, refused to obey a single command. When Singh gestured for the dog to heel, Axel didn't move. Instead, he faced the courtroom. Door. Ears perked, breathing slow, waiting, and deep in Ray's gut, he felt it too. Something was coming. "Mr. Donnell," the judge spoke sternly, "do you wish to respond to the newly introduced footage?" Ray stood slowly. His voice was steady, but it carried a chill. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom leaned in. "I didn't kill Briggs, and I didn't run that raid alone." His eyes darted to Trina. There were others. One of them was there that night, watching, not helping. He paused. "Check the street cam footage again. 3 seconds after I walk into the alley, a shadow breaks across the left wall. Someone else enters, but you cut the feed before that." A murmur ran through the gallery. Trina rose quickly. "The defense is speculating. There is no shadow, no second person. This is a distraction." But the judge held up his hand. "We'll review it, in full." He turned to the court technician. "Play the full tape, no edits." Everyone turned toward the screen. The grainy footage flickered to life. Ray walking into the alley. Timestamp 21:46:07. He disappears out of view. Then 21:46:10. A flicker on the far left, a quick blur, a ripple in the light, not enough to show a face, but enough to say someone else was there. The courtroom gasped. Trina froze. Ray smiled faintly. "You see that?" he said quietly. Axel didn't bark because he knew something was wrong. He saw the man, but nobody listened. Suddenly a noise cracked from the rear hallway, a scuffle, then shouting. The courtroom doors burst open. A guard stumbled through, bruised and wide-eyed. Behind him, Axel free, no leash, no handler, eyes locked on the courtroom like a predator on target. Gasps filled the room. The judge stood. "Who let that dog loose?" Singh stumbled in seconds later, breathless. "I didn't. He bolted out of the station. I tried to hold him. He wouldn't stop." But Axel didn't attack. He didn't run toward Ray. He turned and walked directly to the gallery. Row 3, seat 4, now empty. Axel's nose dropped. He sniffed once, twice, then growled, a deep, vibrating, bone-cold growl that quieted the entire room. He looked at the judge, then turned and walked toward the prosecution table. Everyone stared in frozen disbelief. Trina backed up an inch. Axel sat right in front of her, never broke eye contact. The room collapsed into whispers. The judge, now pale, spoke carefully. "Here's there something you'd like to tell the court, Ms. Cole?" She tried to speak, but her lips parted with nothing behind them. Ray leaned forward. "She's not the one who set me up, but she's protecting someone who did. Later that..." Evening after the court was adjourned and Ray was sent back to holding, Axel remained in the station. But he wouldn't sit still, pacing, circling. Every time a guard walked past the evidence locker, Axel growled. Singh noticed. Something in there? He keyed in and opened the locker. Axel lunged in toward a sealed evidence box from the Briggs shooting. He barked once, pawed the side, then sat. Singh opened it. Inside, the service weapon supposedly found at the crime scene. The one that matched. Ray's fingerprints, but something was off. The cleaning oil used on the weapon, it was citrus-based. Ray always used military-grade CLP, a habit drilled into him overseas. Singh's hands trembled. He opened the gun's slide. Inside, the initials, FR. Not RD, Ray Donnell. Someone had switched weapons. Someone had framed the prints, and Axel had known all along. The next morning, before the courtroom opened, Singh submitted a report, an urgent one. He brought Axel in with him, along with the weapon. The judge called a private chamber session. Ray was brought in. He stood, chained, face still unreadable. The judge cleared his throat. Detective Singh has submitted evidence that suggests your fingerprints may have been planted, that the firearm entered into evidence may not have been yours at all. Ray didn't say a word. He just turned to Axel. Axel stepped forward. No command, no gesture. The German shepherd pressed his head against Ray's leg. The courtroom fell still again. Because it wasn't just a dog greeting an old partner. It was a soldier honoring a fellow soldier who had been punished for following orders too good to be true. Then the real twist unfolded. Through a side door, escorted by 2 officers, the man from the gallery, the one from seat 4, was brought in. He was cuffed, his face bruised, and Trina's entire body language crumbled at the sight of him. Ray's eyes went wide. I knew it. The judge leaned forward. Identify yourself, the man spoke calmly. Frederick Ross, Internal Affairs. More gasps. He continued. I was embedded in the precinct to investigate corruption among a ring of senior officers. Briggs was about to blow the whistle. He met with Ray for protection. I was told to monitor only, but someone got to him first. He paused, swallowed. I was paid to shut my mouth. I watched Ray get framed. I kept silent. Ray stepped forward. Why are you talking now? Frederick met Axel's gaze. That dog wouldn't stop staring at me, like he knew what I did. And last night, I dreamed he tore my throat out. Axel stood by silently, tail still, breathing calm. But his eyes never left Frederick. The truth had been dug up, not by words, not by lawyers, but by a dog who refused to let his partner's story end in silence. The judge, visibly shaken, ordered a full review. Trina resigned that same day. Frederick was remanded for obstruction and conspiracy. And Ray? Ray didn't smile, didn't cheer. He just kneeled inside the courtroom and whispered to Axel, You knew. Axel responded the only way he could, by resting his head gently on Ray's shoulder, the way he did years ago when Ray broke down after a mission gone wrong, and this courtroom, once frozen by tension and lies, was now silent with truth. The courtroom had never felt heavier. Even though the chairs were still filled, even though the press outside buzzed louder than ever, there was a silence inside that pressed down on every chest. It wasn't just the truth that had landed like a stone. It was what it had cost to get there. Ray sat at the defense table. His cuffs had been removed, but freedom didn't feel like freedom yet. His eyes stayed on Axel, who lay beside him, calm, alert, faithful, always faithful. The judge read slowly from the bench. In light of new evidence and pending final confirmation from forensic analysts, this court finds sufficient grounds to stay the charges against Raymond Donnell. He is hereby released under protective supervision until the formal motion for dismissal is filed. A breath escaped Ray's lips. He turned, gently reached down and placed his hand on Axel's head. The German shepherd didn't flinch, but behind his amber eyes, something was wrong. Outside the courtroom, the sun had begun to set. A crowd waited. Beyond the steps, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, but Ray didn't pause. He moved slowly, Axel by his side, Singh walking behind. Once they made it to the car, Ray turned. Axel's not right. Singh nodded. He hasn't eaten in 24 hours. Ray crouched. Axel's breath was shallow. His ribs trembled. His ears drooped slightly, and there was a look in his eyes, one Ray had seen before, from soldiers about to go. "I need a vet," Ray said quickly. "Now." Singh nodded, already dialing. The exam room was sterile, white and quiet. The vet looked up from the bloodwork. Her face said it all. Ray gripped the metal table with both hands. "What is it?" she swallowed. "Splenic hemangiosarcoma. It's a type of cancer. Aggressive. He's been hiding it for a long time." Ray stared at Axel, who lay calmly on the table. "No," the vet continued. "It's already metastasized. His organs are failing. He was only staying strong because he had something left to finish." Ray's voice cracked. "You're saying—" "He waited for this." She nodded, softly. "He was holding on for you." That night, Ray refused to leave the clinic. He sat beside, Axel gently stroking his fur, memories flashing like quiet thunderstorms behind his eyes. Axel pulling him out of a burning car during a mission. Axel sitting beside him. When Ray cried on the steps of his trailer after losing his brother. Axel watching the world with those focused, unwavering eyes, always alert, always protecting, always there. Ray wasn't a man who cried easily. But now. Tears rolled down without permission. Morning. The clinic door opened slowly. Singh stepped inside. He handed Ray something, gently folded in cloth. Axel's original collar, the one he wore the day they met. Ray looked at it like it was made of glass. Turned to Axel. The vet had given him a sedative to keep him comfortable, but his eyes were still open, still watching Ray, still fighting. Ray crouched, pressed his forehead to Axel's. "You don't have to fight anymore," he whispered. "You already won." He took the old collar, slipped it over Axel's head one last time. The dog's tail tapped the table faintly. Once, twice. Ray leaned in, his lips touched Axel's ear. "Stand down, soldier." Axel's breathing slowed, then softened, then stopped. Just like that, still and silent, but not in pain. Not alone. The funeral was private. No flags, no speeches, just a patch of earth under an old oak tree at the edge of the precinct grounds. Ray stood there in his old uniform, Singh beside him. The captain saluted. Ray placed Axel's badge on the wooden box himself, but before they lowered it, he took one last look. Inside he'd placed two things beside Axel, his original collar and a note written on crumpled paper from a prison cell. "I wasn't innocent because the law said so. I was innocent because you never stopped believing it. Thank you, partner." Weeks passed. The case against Ray was formally dismissed. Trina was disbarred. Frederick was sentenced. But Ray didn't care about any of that. He moved quietly. Now, no social media, no interviews, no noise. He bought a small house by the outskirts of town, built a garden, and planted wildflowers over Axel's grave every Sunday. But he never forgot. Not the courtroom gasps, not the betrayal, not the loyalty that outlived pain, captivity, and even cancer. One morning, Ray opened the mailbox. Inside there was no letter, just a key and a tag. Canine Unit, Axel's Legacy Kennel. He looked up. Parked across the road, an old transport van. Singh stepped out. "This is yours now," he said. "The department approved it. We're starting a rehab program for retired canines. Soldiers, trauma dogs, injured units. They need someone who understands." Ray blinked hard. "You sure I'm the guy?" Singh smiled. "No one else ever was." Ray stepped forward, opened the van doors. Inside, two young shepherds, one with a scar over his left eye, the other trembling. In the corner, Ray knelt down, didn't speak, just extended his hand. Both dogs sniffed. The scarred one licked his fingers. The scared one pressed his nose into Ray's chest. And just like that, a new chapter began. But behind that, under every word, every step, every heartbeat, there was Axel gone from the world, but never from Ray's story. Never from the silence that came after a courtroom gasped, and a loyal dog answered not with words, but with a sacrifice no man could forget. There were no sirens anymore, No courtroom cameras, no chains dragging against the concrete floors of a holding cell. Just the steady creak of wood under Ray's boots as he walked across the porch of his new home. A quiet place nestled beside a hill, the wind whispering through the pines, like a voice long silenced but never forgotten. He stopped at the edge of the yard. The grass was freshly trimmed. The sun had barely broken the horizon, painting soft golden strokes across the earth. Wildflowers, blue, white, and a burst of violet, swayed near the small wooden marker. It wasn't much. Just a carved slab, but it carried more weight than any statue. Axel, loyal until the last breath. Beneath it, a single metal tag hung from a bent nail. Faded, but still legible. His service badge. Ray didn't speak. He just stood there. For a moment, his eyes misting again like they always did when he looked at that patch of soil. His hand reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bag of treats, chew sticks that Axel used to love, and placed one beside the marker. Old habits never die, even when the dog does. Behind him, the faint shuffle of paws approached. 2 shepherds, one with a deep scar across his muzzle, the other still nervous in new environments, waited silently by the porch, eyes locked on him. Ray turned, gave a small nod, and both dogs came forward. He didn't train them the way the department. Had he let them be what Axel taught him to be, patient, open, ready to listen even in silence. They lay beside the marker with him now, resting their heads between their paws. Ray crouched beside them, hand brushing both backs softly. "You're safe here," he whispered. "Both of you." It wasn't a dramatic line. It wasn't meant for anyone else, just the truth, simple and quiet, spoken like a vow. The kennel came together slower than expected, but that was okay. Ray didn't want speed. He wanted meaning. Each section was built by hand. Wood planks, fencing, custom beds, shaded spaces. Every new dog that arrived had a story written on their bodies. Scars, missing limbs, cloudy eyes from old explosions. Some barked all night, some refused food. Some simply stared at the wall as if the past still sat right behind it, whispering things they couldn't forget. Ray didn't ask them for anything. He just showed up, every morning, feeding, brushing, sitting in the kennels for hours just reading, out loud or doing paperwork with his back against the fence. In time they came to him, and in time the stories behind those eyes began to soften. It wasn't magic, it was trust. And trust was earned, the same way Axel earned it, with presence, not pressure. A year passed. The local paper did a piece. From cell block to sanctuary, exonerated canine officer builds haven for broken dogs. Ray hated the headline. He wasn't broken. He was rebuilt, bit, by paws, not people. Still, the story brought help, donations, volunteers. And once, it brought someone he hadn't seen since the trial, Sergeant Singh. He showed up with a file in his hand and a look Ray knew too well, the look of a man still carrying something. Ray met him by the gate. "Thought you forgot about me," he said. Singh smiled faintly. "Just giving you space." "What's the file?" Singh held it up. "Trina wants to make a deal. Full confession. Statement of guilt. She's in a bad place now. Claims she was forced to bury evidence. Threats from the old chief. Money trails, it's all here." Ray stared at the folder, but he didn't reach for it. "Does it change anything?" he asked. Singh paused. "Maybe not." Ray nodded slowly, then turned away. "I'm not interested in revenge anymore," he said. "I got something better." Singh followed his gaze toward the yard. Dozens of dogs playing, some tumbling in grass, others sleeping in the sun. "You sure?" Singh asked. Ray smiled. "I'm free," he said. "Not because the court said so, because he let me be." Singh stood, in silence a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll leave the file in your mailbox, just in case." But Ray already knew. He'd never open it. Some things were better buried than carried. That night, as dusk wrapped the world in quiet shadows, Ray sat alone by the fireplace with a worn photo in his hand. It was taken years ago, him in uniform. Axel, at his side, both staring into the camera like they could see the future coming and were ready for it. Ray leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, then looked toward the mantel. where Axel's collar hung on a nail beside a folded flag. He didn't speak. He just smiled faintly, and in the silence, something stirred. Not sound, not memory, but presence. That deep, aching peace that came not from forgetting, but from knowing it mattered. Axel's story hadn't ended with a gasp in a courtroom. It had ended with a life rebuilt, one broken soul at a time. And in the kennel beyond the porch, the scarred shepherd lifted his head and barked once into the night. A breeze moved through the trees, then stillness, and in that stillness, a whisper, a bond, a legacy. Never forgotten, never gone, only passed on.